Oh, you got it.
All right, let's give a few minutes for people to join the webinar.
Okay, makes sense.
All right. Hey everyone, welcome. We are so excited to be starting Dating Done Right, how to recognize red flags. We're just giving a few minutes for people to join. I see participants coming in. This is a webinar format, so we're not going to be able to see all your faces, but you can put your questions in the question and answer box, and we will do our best to answer either during the session or afterwards. I know some of you had submitted questions beforehand, and some of you aren't able to join live, but we will do our best to answer all the questions that came in beforehand. And as you'll see, some questions will be answered just in the course of the presentation. So by the end, it won't even be a question anymore. But if there's any extra questions, we will address them. Okay, so welcome. My name is Sasha Gordon. I know it says Sasha Friedman on my screen. I have to change my Zoom. It still wants to use my old name, but I've gotten remarried, and Sasha Gordon is now my last name. Okay, so my story in a nutshell is that I got married when I was very young, and I went through an 11-year marriage and wasn't super happy, to put it mildly, and got divorced, and now I'm remarried. So my mission and goal is to help other women, people in general, just get into the right marriage so that they don't have to go through the hell of the wrong marriage. Okay, so to that end, I wanted to bring on an expert. I'm just changing my name. I wanted to bring on an expert in the field who could really address red flags so that we know what we're looking for and we're not going to get into the wrong relationship. So I'm very, very happy to be bringing on Yeshaya Kraus. Yeshaya Kraus, LCSW, is a clinical social worker in Far Rockaway, New York. As director of Shalom Task Force's education department, he works to expand both the scope and depth of community and school-based educational programming with a focus on healthy relationships and abuse awareness. He also runs a private practice in the Bayswater section of Far Rockaway, working with individuals, couples, and parents. Okay.
Okay, all righty.
So Yeshaya, if I can just hand the mic over to you and you can get started.
Okay, the mic is taken. Thank you so much for having me on. I'd like to just say hello to everybody who I can't see, but thank you so much for joining us. And it's always great to talk to people about these issues. Like they're so important to us. Like as human beings, we go into so many relationships in our lives, whether they're personal relationships, professional relationships, and it's important for people to really know what we're looking at and what we're looking for. One of the interesting things that I've noticed is that a lot of times, even though obviously the details of different relationships may change, or different kinds of relationships have different details, the foundational dynamics are pretty much the same. So we're going to talk today. We're going to be talking about really two kinds of relationships and how they relate to each other. So I guess that's technically three kinds of relationships. We're going to be talking a little bit about the relationship that you have with yourself. And we're going to be talking about relationships in terms of dating, what to look for in a more practical perspective, and how to keep yourself as safe as we possibly can. I just want to put this out there, and there's obviously there are no guarantees. We have to do our due diligence and do whatever we can in order to keep ourselves safe. So what we're going to talk about is really the best that we can do, the best that we can do just as much as is humanly possible, and really doing the best we can to keep ourselves safe and to look out for ourselves. So the place where I like to start, and seeing as how we're really talking about things through a dating lens, The one question that I always think is important to ask, and I don't know who's on the line, where ages people are at, what stages of life people are at, but I think it's always important to really ask the following questions when we start thinking about dating and forming these kinds of new committed relationships. Do you want to date? Are you ready to date? How do you know, one way or the other? And these are all very, very valid and important questions to ask. You basically go, like, I think in any Orthodox circle, there is definitely, or many Orthodox circles anyway, there's a big focus on family. There's a big focus on creating a family. And I think that many times we look at that expectation, we kind of lose sight of ourselves, or it's possible to lose sight of ourselves when we think about that expectation. So it's really a discussion within itself. You have to know yourself. You have to know what you want. You have to know what you're ready for. Marriage is a 24/7, 365, hopefully 120 commitment. That's just what it is. There are ups and downs, which is a very normal thing. It's very normal for there to be ups and downs. It's just part of human life. You have wavelengths in terms of where you are and what your mood is and what your emotional reality is. And it can be very difficult at times. It really can. And it can also be very rewarding. It's something to really just talk about very seriously with someone who knows you well. The important thing is to not just do it because that's what people expect you to do. You shouldn't be doing it because you're feeling pressured, or you're feeling any number of different kinds of pressure to get married, start a family, be a certain way, do a certain thing. Society should not be dictating your major life decisions. Society can inform your life decisions, but at the end of the day, the decision should be yours. So here are a few questions to think about when you're looking at this stage of life, whichever stage of life it presents itself in. Question number one: what does dating mean to you? All right, what does it mean to get out there and date? For some people, maybe it means shidduch dating. For some people, maybe it means looking at a dating app. For some people, it means allowing friends to set you up with somebody that they think might be a good idea. For some people, it means sitting in a hotel lounge and schmoozing about all the things that are on the official checklist of things you're supposed to talk about on a date. And for some people, it may be, I don't know, axe throwing or something. There are many different ideas of what dating means to you. The idea of putting yourself in a position of potentially creating a close and committed relationship with somebody to spend a nice chunk of your life with. What does that actually mean to you? When you picture yourself dating, how does it feel? And that could feel any number of ways. It could feel butterflies. It could be excitement. It could be totally freaking out and wanting to hide under a blanket or something. There are many different feelings that could come up. It doesn't have to be one, doesn't have to be two. It could be a bunch of feelings all at once. And that can kind of be confusing to kind of piece together. So the extension of these questions: what does marriage mean to you? When a person thinks about marriage, you're getting married. You're the person getting married. So what is your personal vision of what marriage looks like? How do you feel about that marriage? What are your expectations of marriage? What do you want your marriage to look like? These are all things that people are you can ask 10 people, you're going to have like 15 different answers. These are all different aspects of dating, marriage, committed relationships, and all of these things that you deserve to like really put some thought into it, to really think about where you're going, what you want to do. It's kind of like so there's this thing I do sometimes. Dump the kids in the car and say, okay, we're going someplace, and I tell them they're allowed to tell me exactly, like, okay, everybody gets like 10 blocks, and you get to tell me when to make a left and when to make a right. It's fun. It's fun. We usually end up at, like, I don't know, the local slushy store, but that's a different story. They know directions by now. But it's kind of like that. If you're not thinking these things through, you're getting in a car, like, okay, I'm putting other people in control, and they're going to dictate where we go, where we end up. And it's something that if you want to be in the driver's seat of your life, you deserve to think about. You deserve to plan out, okay, obviously things are not going to go exactly as planned. There's an old saying I heard, the one plan that's not going to work out is the one you have. But we deserve to at least think these things through and figure out roughly where we want to go. One thing to think about, that people generally pick up their impressions of relationships in general and specifically marriage from their family of origin. Um, Thinking about what you're expecting, thinking about what you want and what you don't want. Very often you may end up discovering that a lot of those things come from home or from friends that you may have spent a lot of time with their families. But really going into it with your eyes open is a great recipe to be able to dictate exactly, or not to dictate, but to define where you want to see yourself. Going in with your eyes closed, on the other hand, sometimes it works and it's great, it's very nice, and sometimes, unfortunately, it does not. So we all deserve to have that kind of clarity in terms of where we really want to go. Another really important question to have and to ask yourself and to really think about is, how does the thought of being married strike you? So when we're talking about dating, we're talking about the process, we're talking about the activity, we're talking about the idea of developing a relationship. So putting that part, let's say, okay, so now let's picture ourselves the day after the wedding, the week after the wedding, the year after the wedding. Thinking about yourself in that kind of situation, how does that strike you? What are the feelings? Where do those feelings come from? Just thinking about how you react to the overall experience and the hopeful outcome of the overall experience. And another thing to think about is, what parts of marriage do you really have no connection with right now? You know, that when I speak with younger people, one thing that comes up a lot is, well, I have absolutely no idea how to make a budget. I have no idea how to balance a checkbook. And that's, I think that's maybe the most obvious one for people who are not in that situation. But there are so many different aspects of marriage that a person just is not familiar with. And thinking that through, thinking about, well, okay, what would it be like to have a spouse? What would it be like to live in the house with somebody who, you know, for 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, a year, 3 years, regardless of how long you know each other, you don't know each other under those circumstances. You just don't. You know, it's a different kind of relationship than what you're used to. And again, going with your eyes open and thinking about what that might be like is something to consider. It's something to think about. Is dating something that's for you at this point? And I don't mean to say that that you go through all these questions and you should have very clear answers to any of these questions. It's somewhere to start things. It's all food for thought. The answers may change from time to time. I've spoken with people who have started dating, taken a break for a few years, and went back with a completely different perspective. These are all things to. These are not questions that, okay, I gave the answer, it's set in stone, and then, you know, I'm off to riding off into the sunset now. These are things that change. We all change as our experience changes. So the answers to these questions may change as well, and we may not even be able to answer the questions with any real clarity. But it's something to think about, something to have in mind, and to get us thinking in that direction. And that's really what leads us to self-awareness. Self-awareness, when we mentioned the idea of having a relationship with yourself, that's the foundation of any relationship that you're going to have with anyone else. And you know, we could go on for a good long time about that stuff, which might be fun, but I want to be able to get to the other stuff also. So we're just going to give a basic overview of a way to start thinking about self-awareness. And that's really where a healthy, personalized vision of marriage starts. You have to know what you bring in. So checking in with yourself, that's something to think about. What's coming up when you focus on a certain idea? Those are the feelings that are kind of going to come up, and being aware of those emotions, acknowledging those emotions, giving yourself permission to feel those emotions if they're ones that you're not comfortable with. These are all just basic ideas of how to get started. On a deeper level, so I'm going to share the screen now. I'm going to put up a slide that we came up with. I'm a big fan of Venn diagrams. Give me a second here. There we go. Okay. Now we are going to actually put this up on screen so we can actually take a look at it. So if you take a look at this slide here, you look around and you have 7 different aspects of personality. And I'm not saying that you're necessarily limited to 7 aspects. I'm sure within each one of these 7 aspects of personality, you could totally take them apart into different aspects of each piece. But this is a good way to start really thinking about it. I'll go around the wheel and That's a way to start thinking about who we are, what we bring into a marriage, what we bring into our own lives. This physical presentation, and this is important because I find that a lot of times people will describe themselves with subjective terms when they're talking about physicality. So to describe myself physically, I would say I am this tall, I have this weight, I have this color hair, I have this color eyes. That's all physical. For somebody to describe themselves as I'm too fat, I'm too skinny, I'm too tall, I'm too short, that's not describing physicality. That's describing how you feel about your physicality. So writing down just the physical attributes, just plain, simple, straight up fact, can kind of help you to get an idea of where you will be, where you're up to emotionally as well. State of mind is where that leads to. State of mind is your emotional world. What are the feelings that you generally go through on a daily basis? What are your themes? Everybody has themes. Everybody has certain thoughts that pretty much play themselves through, different messages that they're getting from whatever's around them on a regular basis. Whether those messages are you rock and you're doing great, or the opposite, which is obviously much less comfortable to have. Knowing what your themes are, knowing how you feel about yourself and about life in general is an important thing to think about. And the reason that it's important to think about, it's important to realize is because once you acknowledge it, you can start to work with it. You know, there may be certain messages that you're getting that are completely accurate, and there may be some that are not so accurate, but that for some reason you've been fed throughout the course of your lifetime. Your sense of spirituality. What's your sense of connection to something higher, something greater than you? And we're not talking about necessarily religiosity. We're talking about your sense of connection to God, sense of connection to higher powers, something more than what you are just by yourself. What's your background? Your background is the family of origin, your culture, how you were brought up, the things that you've considered to be important, which leads to the next thing, your values. Values can include religious values, but it's not limited to that. One value could be, so here's a good example. One value could be putting your shoes away when you come through the door. It's important to you. It's something which helps you to feel at ease, and it helps you to feel like things are put together. On the other hand, another value could be I value feeling relaxed, and pressure to put my shoes away does not make me feel relaxed. So these are all values, and it could come out in very mundane things. It doesn't have to be save the whales. You know, it doesn't have to be like a major value that you're thinking about, but it's something that's important to you. Knowing what's important to you is definitely going to help you out in life in general, and it's important to know what you're bringing into the marriage that way too. Strengths and weaknesses. If you want to think about it like this, values, and I think really to an extent life goals, inform what you want to construct in life. They inform how you want to run your life. Strengths and weaknesses are the tools that you bring in with which to do that. So if I have a blueprint for something and I left my toolbox home, I'm not following a blueprint. It's not happening. Whereas if I have a toolbox and I've never looked in it and I have a blueprint, I don't know what I'm going to be able to accomplish because I don't know what's in the toolbox. But if I know what's in my toolbox, I know which ones I have, which ones I don't, which ones I can use to accomplish what I want to accomplish, and which ones I can maybe kind of jury rig to accomplish something that maybe they're not intended for, then I can follow the blueprint to a large extent. If I either don't know what's in the toolbox or I leave my toolbox at home, then my values are not going to inform what the blueprint looks like, and my life goals of actually building that blueprint are not going to happen. Life goals are pretty much self-explanatory, but they change. All of this, any of these things, or most of these things, can really change based on where we are in life and what we're doing. So, second. So, and that's it. The idea of knowing yourself is one which really can inform not just the relationship with yourself, but obviously what you're going to bring into a marriage also. One thing that I think is, once we're talking about the idea of self-awareness and how important that is, you can start to thinking along these lines also, particularly in terms of marriage. Is there a particular challenge that you're facing that may prompt you to work towards getting married in hopes of fixing it? There are any number of challenges, the ones that come up most often are unfortunately addiction. Many people, this is true, I think, for men and women. I'm not sure exactly what the statistics are, but there are people who suffer from some sort of an addiction, whether it's a sex addiction or drugs or any number of other addictions that they're hoping, like, okay, if I find that person who's going to have that great connection with me and it's going to be solid, I'm going to feel loved and accepted, then this whole thing is going to go away. It's not. It is not going to happen that way. I say that with a very strong degree of certainty. And it's true with depression, it's true with anxiety, with other mental health challenges, with other emotional challenges. Marriage, I forget who said this. It was one of those, one of the bigger psychologists in the firm world said something to the effect of marriage is not a hospital. It's not. It's a place where you go in and you do a lot of work and you hopefully build something wonderful and beautiful, a safe space for you to connect with someone who loves you and cares for you and has your back. It's not a hospital. You're not going to fix the things that you feel are broken just by going into just by getting married. It doesn't happen. So that's something to think about. If that's a reason why you want to get married, then maybe address that first. Addressing it properly, getting whatever help you need is going to help you to be a better spouse. It will. It will also help you to feel better about yourself in general, hopefully. So that's something to think about. A lot of times when we think about starting to marry, to date or continuing to date, there's people get nervous. They feel like they have anxiety. So the question to ask yourself with that is that if everything is lined up, and everything like on paper makes sense, and you really can't put a finger on what exactly it is that's making you nervous, it might be worth it to jump into dating. I'm not saying to jump into marriage. It might be worth it to jump into dating. Because a lot of times people do get nervous because they just don't know what they're getting themselves into. The unknown can be a very scary thing, validly so. You know, we're built that way. We're built in a way Hashem wired us that we are scared of things that we don't know about. And we feel much more safe when things are familiar. But sometimes it's worth jumping in. You don't need to have complete clarity. You totally don't. It just feel okay enough to take the next step. You can also use this Venn diagram, this self-portrait idea to kind of come up with who you might like to date or who you might like to marry. What kinds of values or background or strengths and weaknesses do you feel that that person might have that would make them particularly interesting to you, that you might like to get to know them better? So it's a nice little exercise to do when you have some time. If anybody, I can actually, Sasha, I can send you a PDF with that. You can send it out to people who might request it. So the next thing, so that's on self-awareness. So now that we've spoken, now we all know ourselves really well. We're on great terms with ourselves. So it's important to understand now what exactly a relationship is, how it works, and why they're important. It's a fascinating thing. I think about all the different needs that people have in life. There's food, drink, shelter, all these wonderful things. By and large, most of these things, if we were stuck in a cave someplace, we'd probably get on okay. It might be a little gross. You know, we wouldn't have, you know, our jacuzzis and whatever, but we'd be okay for the most part. We can find food. We can probably find water. We can get some sort of a tent or live in a cave, whatever it is. The one human need that we cannot accomplish by ourselves is the need to connect with someone else. And this is a need. They've done all sorts of research about how people react to not having someone to attach themselves to. And it's not pretty. It's not fun. People need to connect with others. It's just part of how we're built. We need other people. So this is, I think, why relationships are so important. This is why there is this kind of thing in the society that we live in, to connect with other people, to date, to marry. So let's think about how these things form. We do actually have another nice slide, which I'm going to pull up. If I can get it working.
Just while you're doing that, I'll comment on what you just said. It's so true that, like, a lot of times as women, we want to believe, and we are very independent and self-sufficient. And it's like, we don't need a man, you know, we don't want a man, or maybe we want a man, but no, don't need a man. But it is kind of like hardwired into us to be in connection with others and kind of needing that connection to thrive. So as much as, you know, we're so grateful for the advancements in society where women can do everything that men can do and, you know, earn a living and not be dependent, like, financially, it's still so like vital to remember that like we are social creatures and we are wired for connection, and how important it is to kind of honor that and not be too isolated
Yeah.
socially.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely
Yeah.
very good to like honor that part of ourselves.
For sure. For sure. And it's like we could go on for a while about like different research pieces, like just medical benefits that they've identified with people who have a close committed relationship, like long-term relationships. People I think live longer, and they're like, you know, there's all sorts of nice things that they say about, you know, getting that kind of relationship going. Um, so, and it's an important part of life, you know, regardless of how it ends up looking. It's an important part of life to really to have. So if we think about how these things form, it's a fascinating thing. Like first on the list, you start off with attraction, which is usually means physical attraction. You know, somebody will look at somebody else like, oh, okay, that person looks nice. That's usually where where the first connection starts, because visual is the most obvious one. Visual is the most obvious connection that we have. We see something, and that's our first impression of it. So the attraction is where things start off. It's not always physical. In fact, there's one of the things that people often ask is, if you're not attracted to the other person, should you cut it off? Should you back away? The answer to which is that no, not necessarily. If and this is going to sound very politically incorrect, so I apologize for anybody who doesn't like it. But if a person is repulsed by the other person, which happens, it does happen, then it's very possible that it will not grow. But if there's nothing wrong, then odds are you can find it's worth a shot of trying to develop attraction from other areas. As you get to know the other person, you may become emotionally attracted to the other person, or spiritually attracted to the other person. You know, you may learn to appreciate their values. You may learn to appreciate all sorts of different aspects of them, which are not strictly physical. And that level of attraction in those other aspects will end up creating a sense of attraction that encompasses the physical as well. So that's the answer to that question for the most part. Attraction
Yeah,
gives it.
I just want to like totally reiterate that. Like you said, like it's not PC. I think it's so great that you're saying that, because I don't know if it's really emphasized enough in the Jewish world, at least like when I was growing up, it was like, oh, the external doesn't matter. Just look at the inside of the person. But yeah, you do need to be attracted for sure, not repulsed.
Yes.
And I agree with everything you said, that like attraction can grow, but if there's repulsion, like just stop.
Yeah, it's probably not worth it. I remember there's this one story I heard as a yeshiva bacher who was set up by one of his rebbeim, and this guy is like, it's after I don't know, they've gone out on a couple of dates, and he's hemming and hawing. He's obviously not comfortable, and finally, after a good few minutes of discussion, the Rebbe says to him, "Do you like the way she looks?" And he's like, "No, I don't." And but like it was something that had never even occurred to him, that this is something to pay attention to, ironically. So like it's such an important thing to like to pay attention, to acknowledge, and to give yourself permission to acknowledge, especially in situations where maybe people aren't used to giving themselves that kind of permission. But it's a really important piece of this. And that being said, attraction is something that can grow. With attraction, you may find yourself wanting to draw closer. And that's when the trust phase starts. When you start to see, can I trust this person? Am I able to take a chance at risking vulnerability? Vulnerability can mean any number of things. For the sake of this conversation, vulnerability basically means letting the other person into your world to a degree that they were not in your world before. So that could mean sharing your favorite flavor of ice cream. You know, I don't know, maybe somebody has a very controversial flavor of ice cream that's their favorite, or not. Just allowing the other person to get to know you a little bit more and seeing how they react to it. Do they react in a way which makes you feel good? Or do they make you react in a way which makes you back off a little bit and feel like, okay, that's a little, I don't feel so safe with that. So now, depending on that, if I feel safe, I get a positive reaction to my opening up a little bit. I feel good about it. I feel safe. And that breeds more attraction. Safety is very attractive to people. It
Mm,
is.
I love
And
it.
this and the cycle continues,
Yeah.
ideally. And it's I think probably a more accurate description of how these things go would be something like attraction, trust, vulnerability, then like a few wiggles along the line. It's not a straightforward circle by any
Right,
stretch of the
right, right,
imagination.
right. Yeah.
Um,
So
but that's
true.
it.
Yeah. It was exactly kind of like that progression, I think, with my husband that I have now, where when I was able to open up and trust him and be more vulnerable, and I did see how he positively reacted, and I felt safe, that like definitely increased that feeling of safety and then attraction. So I am totally with you, and I totally get that.
Yeah, and that's really what it all boils down to. As we get more into actually discussing the red flags themselves, we're going to talk about how that comes out. The feeling of safety is the most important thing that we're looking for in marriage and in those kinds of connections. Love and closeness and emotional, like that all, what it leads to is safety. They're important ingredients, but they're not the bottom. They're not that bottom connection that basically is that's the foundation of a healthy marriage. Um, as we mentioned before, attraction doesn't have to be just physical. Like, and even as things go on, you may, it comes, it goes. You may find yourself at different stages attracted to different things more strongly than to others. But that's really where it all starts, and that's what starts that cycle going. So we're going to talk a little bit now about what can go wrong and what can go right, because I think it's important to spend time on both sides of that. Actually, maybe I should just keep the screen share up for a little bit, because that's really where we're going with this. So what we have here, we call this the relationship spectrum, and it's not really a spectrum. I think it's kind of a misnomer. Healthy and unhealthy is definitely a spectrum. Abusive is kind of like a animal of its own. What really describes a healthy relationship? As you can see on the screen, healthy means that there's respect, there's mutual respect, there's that feeling, as we said, of safety. When there's conflict, or when there's difficulty, there's a feeling of we can turn towards each other, we can work together. There's equal voice. There's like, I feel like if I have a problem with the way things are going, or if I want to add on something to the way the relationship is going, if I want to change something, I can say so, and I know that desire to change something will be respected and given weight, and that will be there for each other. There's a mutual responsibility that neither of us feels like we're doing it all and we can't talk about it. The flip side is unhealthy. There's support or less support when when a problem comes up, when there's a challenge in the relationship. It's not a matter of turning towards each other to work for it. It's a matter of turning away from each other. That, I think, really is the essential difference between a healthy and an unhealthy relationship. That the healthy relationship is turning towards and the unhealthy is turning away from. There's a degree of selfishness, there's a lack of communication, and that keeps the relationships in a more disconnected and distant place, as opposed to a healthy relationship where even when there's conflict, there's a closeness. I think conflict is like, here's another maybe politically incorrect thing, but actually it's not so politically incorrect. Conflict is an important part of a relationship. It is. I mean, you think about it. Let's say you're dating for 3 years before you decide to get married. It's very more, and from circles, very extreme. It's a long time. How well do you really know each other? You don't. So let's just call both of them 25 for the sake of argument. You met each other at 22 years old. You got 22 years worth of experience, which have created two drastically different people. And even though there's some overlap, otherwise there would be absolutely nothing to talk about. You're very different people. You have different emotional triggers. You have different feelings. There's a different everything. Conflict in a relationship is a given. The question is what you do with it. So you can use that conflict to bring yourselves closer together by supporting each other through it and showing respect and turning towards. Or you can allow the conflict to drive each other apart by being defensive, by not turning towards each other, but turning away from each other, by allowing resentment to build up and to stew, which one can imagine is not that great for a relationship. Then the third thing is, which is really something, I don't know, so actually before we get to the third thing, most relationships fall out somewhere in the middle. There's really no such thing as a perfectly healthy relationship, very unlikely. There are stories told about Gedolim who have had amazing relationships. Most people are not that. Most people. Most people are a work in progress, which is not just fine, it's great, as long as the progress is happening and people are both aware and working towards those same things. The goal is to be healthy enough and working towards being healthier. That's the goal in relationships. An abusive relationship, by contrast, is one where there's control, manipulation, there's threatening, and really any of those circles that we mentioned before can be grounds for abuse to take hold, whether it's physical abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse, sexual abuse, spiritual or religious abuse, digital, like pretty much any aspect of somebody's life can be something which is open to somebody else trying to take over and to disallow people from making their own decisions. So I love this quote. It's a great quote. And when you have both people going into a relationship with this in mind, that's like perfect. You have the balance, you have everything there. So I'm just going to read it out. I will put myself into the relationship to the best of my abilities in a way that helps you feel safe, secure, cherished, and loved. I will do this in a way which does not compromise my ability to feel the same way. So what you see here,
I love that.
thank you.
Such a great summation of a healthy relationship.
Yeah, I forget when we came up with this one. This is like 2-3 years ago, and I just find like these great places to use it. It's such a good quote. And like you think about it, it really does describe all the different aspects of what a healthy relationship should be. There's healthy boundaries, there's the mutual responsibility and respect, there's the investing in the relationship on an emotional level, and there's trust that I'm going to be allowed to feel the same way, that you're going to work towards that same goal. So it's a very important. I just stopped sharing again. Sorry about that. I think it's a great summation to think about. So we've asked a lot of. There's been a lot of discussion. So you can have this discussion about the positive markers versus the negative markers. So you'll have on the left side, you can see there's basically the same things that we said by a healthy relationship. There's respect, there's trust, there's positive feelings overall, feelings of safety. This last one for some people is kind of a little bit of a mind blower. Personal space. One of the things that I like to say when to people who are considering getting married, for the teens who are dating, but I think that even for adults, it's a good thing to hear this sometimes, is that you don't stop becoming an individual when you get married. You become an individual who is married. It's not that marriage takes over your entire life. It complements your life. It's a new addition, and you can use that sense of individual. The individuality that you have is what you bring into the marriage. It's what you do to make the marriage good. So sometimes people need personal space. Some people need more than others, but that's part of what you can hope that your spouse will be able to be aware of and give you. And then the flip side, you have the negative markers, the red flags, disrespect, lying or dishonesty, and it's not just towards you, not just towards each other. If you're, let's say you're out on a date and you see and you're going out with somebody who is the gentleman of the world to you, but treats the waiter with disrespect, or talks disrespectfully about others, or you notice that there's a tendency to be dishonest about certain things or condescending even towards other people, it will come out in your relationship. It is something that's going to come out in your relationship, and it's something to really be aware of. So just getting back to the good stuff. So what we want to think about when we're doing all these things is we want to think about what role red flags really are going to play when you're trying to develop a relationship. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a deal breaker. It doesn't necessarily mean that, okay, I saw this one thing that happened and that's it, we're out. it's something to think about. You got to take notice of what's going on. Not everything that happens that triggers you to start feeling uncomfortable or being a little iffy about things is necessarily a deal breaker. You want to really think about things. So there are two kinds of trouble, which we're going to talk about. There's what we're going to call, for lack of a better word, normal trouble versus dysfunctional trouble. And we mean dysfunctional in the clinical sense, not in the, oh my gosh, you're so dysfunctional kind of sense. We mean, really, it's just something which will not allow our relationship to function properly. So normal communication problems, it's normal for people to have difficulty communicating, especially about difficult topics. It's another great line I heard once. Uncomfortable conversations are uncomfortable. There is nothing that you are going to do to make uncomfortable conversations more comfortable. They have to be had, and there's a good way to do them, and there's a wrong way to do it, but it's something which comes up. It's relatively common. Conflict, that's always going to be there. I think John Gottman is a famous marriage therapist, does a lot of research in marriage. I forget exactly what the numbers are, but the ridiculously high percentage, somewhere between 65 and 70% of disagreements that couples have over the course of their lifetime are never going to be resolved, ever. You know, one person is always going to be leaving their socks on the floor, and one person will always be upset about it. It's just something that's going to happen. The question is how you deal with it, how you navigate that. There can be disagreements. There's going to be there may be nervousness. You may doubt certain decisions without really being able to identify why. This is not just with dating. This is marriage too. These are things that will happen, but that's normal. That's to be expected. Dysfunctional, on the other hand, is, let's see, being afraid of the person you're dating. Being afraid that they're gonna, or noticing that they're gonna do something to intimidate you, or feeling afraid of something that they're gonna say. Fear does not have a place in a healthy relationship. It just doesn't. Feeling like you have to change yourself or hide part of yourself from the other person or others because of the relationship, or that the other person needs to change something about himself. Right? Those are two sides. Like it's feeling like you have to change yourself, feeling pressured to change something in order to fit with the guy's vision on life or his vision of what a spouse is. That doesn't belong in a healthy relationship. And the same goes the other way around. If you feel that you are pressuring the other person to change, that's problematic. General feeling of feeling unsafe. If you're feeling unsafe, that's a problem. As we said, the safety is the foundation of a good relationship. You need that. Feeling like you can't voice your opinion because of how the other person is going to react, which really comes back to what we said before about being afraid. But this is such an important part of a solid relationship, is being able to share your feelings, being able to comment on how things are going and try to direct things in a way which makes you feel more comfortable. And then in general, feeling like you're being controlled or that you need to be controlling. Those are problematic as well. And like when we were talking before about the definition of an abusive relationship, that's really what it all boils down to. In an abusive relationship is that one person has complete control over the other person in one or more facets of their life. It's about a lack of self-direction, about a lack of consent, about a lack of being able to say yes or no to whatever it is, because you just feel so intimidated and afraid. So how do we keep track of these things? How do we keep ourselves safe? A lot of questions came in before the webinar. Some of the questions were, how do we know that the person I'm going out with is not this diagnosis, is not that diagnosis, doesn't have this situation going on? And I think the honest answer is you will not. You will not know. What you will know, though, is that you feel uncomfortable. You will know that you feel very uncomfortable because of something, right? And it's like, it's part of the amazing thing really about our nervous system. We're wired to pick up fear, to pick up dangerous situations. Now, because we're human beings and we're so smart and we have all these like thoughts going on in our head, we're also very good at telling ourselves, okay, this is not a problem. I can only imagine like what the first person to go skydiving was going through. Like you think about it, and just think about it. Like I'm standing up there, like however many thousands of feet up in the air, and like I'm about to be the first person to jump out of a plane with just this dinky little thing on my back that's going to save me from splattering into the ground. his nervous system was probably going completely nuts. And in his mind, he was probably remembering that we've designed this and it's safe and scientifically it's all good. So it's really, it's a battle between the emotional mind and the rational mind. So in situations like this, we're totally going to have that. And as we said before, like a society dictating certain decisions in our life, that is, and having all these ideas of what kind of pressure we're under in order to conform, in order to do certain things, that's very much an idea of certain emotions being outweighed by either rational mind or emotions kind of dressed up as rational mind, and the emotions that come along with that. So think about it.
Like when I think back to my first marriage, I dated for only a very short time. Like we went on, let's say 10 dates over 2 months. And there are certain things like I didn't see because I feel like he was like on his best behavior. And then there did turn out to be some very controlling behaviors in our marriage. But I'm trying to think, like, were there red flags I could have seen if I was more aware? And there was like a few incidents. There was one incident in particular where like he really wasn't respecting my boundaries. And like as a young, very frum girl, I was like still in that mode of like, give people the benefit of the doubt, shalom bayis, give in, compromise, do what your husband or fiance at the time, what it wants. Like, I think there's such a culture, especially in the frum world, of like, giving them a benefit of the doubt, overlooking things that you're like, oh, that's not so bad, right? Like, even though like I do, like if I really listen to my gut and I would know I was uncomfortable,
Yeah. And like that's not uncommon at all. Like, so Shalom Task Force, like, for people who are familiar, we have a hotline in which people can call in and talk about different relationship concerns that they have, whether abusive or not. And one of the things that happens pretty frequently is that people will call in and say, I remember when we were dating and I saw this and I brushed it under the rug. I feel like, okay, it's not that big of a deal. So like, it's very interesting to think about the idea of dan l'kaf zechus, right? We're supposed to give people the benefit of the doubt. It is, on the one hand, it's human nature to judge, which is why the Mishnah doesn't say don't judge. It's what we do. It's how we interact with the world. We judge things and we figure out what they are. But at the same time, even if we're being dan l'kaf zechus, to consider, am I comfortable with how I'm feeling right now, is something that you owe to yourself. It's something that's important for you to like really take into account. Like, okay, fine, maybe he meant for this to be a joke and for this, and whatever mental hoops you have to hop through in order to excuse what the person did. But at the same time, you don't feel comfortable with that, which is an important thing to acknowledge and to honor. And there are so many reasons why we would do that. You mentioned a few of them. The concept of shalom bayis. I saw an amazing thing actually. So the definition of the word shalom is one of the mefarshim in Birchas Kriyas Shema. The beginning says the first bracha of Kriyas Shema says Osa Shalom v'Borei Sakol. He made shalom and then created everything. So he explains, why did Hashem have to make shalom first? So he says that when Hashem created the world, he used different elements which by themselves would not be able to coexist. Fire and water can't exist together, and those are two of the elements that Hashem used. So he had to create the concept of having two opposite things being able to work together in order to create the world. So shalom bayis means, if you want to take that definition, the concept of taking two opposite things, ish v'isha, man and woman, who are not the same, and allowing them to use their strengths and their different characteristics together to create a greater whole. It doesn't mean negating one of them and downplaying everything for the sake of not having conflict. So it's an interesting take on it.
Yeah, that's great. That's really great. Because I think, especially as women, we're so socialized to be the nice girl, to play small, stroke the man's ego or whatever it is, instead of really, acknowledging and honoring, like, you have your own strengths, you're bringing them to the table, you're uniting those maybe two opposites, but you're not muting yourself. you're not, minimizing yourself.
Right, right. And quite honestly, most healthy men don't want their wives to mute themselves. They don't. I mean, it could be like, I don't know, maybe a couple hundred years ago, things were different. But at this point, most healthy men want a partnership. They want somebody who's there to support them and that they're able to feel like they're supporting each other. So it's an important thing to really think about. So just a few other things, just in terms of trusting your gut, the feeling, like as we said, there are many reasons why you might want to kind of brush things under, like not trusting yourself, not trusting your feelings. One that comes up a lot, and it circles back to what we were saying about marriage being a hospital. The idea of, okay, yeah, I acknowledge that there's a problem. I acknowledge that there's this going on, but I can fix it. I can fix them. I'm going to be the one to make this person into the whatever it is that I see. I see the potential, whatever it is. Going into a marriage, assuming that you're going to be able to fix the other person, is not going to work out that well. It's just not. You're marrying the person who is in front of you right now, not the person who you feel that with hard work and encouragement and support and this and that, in 10 years is going to be whatever it is that you have in mind.
Yeah, I learned that the hard way.
yeah. And like I think a lot of people don't hear this going in. Your first responsibility is to yourself. Your first responsibility when you're dating is to yourself, to your future family, to what that's going to be like. And thinking to yourself, oh, okay, I'm going to fix the person. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to work whatever magic I'm going to work. Even if it does work eventually in 10, 15, 20 years, that means you're spending 20 years getting there and not being happy in your marriage.
Yeah.
You deserve better. You deserve better.
So there's a comment coming in. So
Yeah.
Judith says, there are plenty of instances where down the cops list doesn't apply to personal preferences. If someone makes you feel uncomfortable, you don't have to be with them.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah, it's such an important thing to think about. People often have this idea of being mevater on things. There's another concept of being mevater, of letting people, which basically amounts to allowing yourself to become a shmata because I want to be the good person. Even under good circumstances, being mevater, to my understanding, only applies when it's something you can honestly do without. When it's basics of respect, when it's basics of safety, then that's not called being mevater because you're never really going to give up on that.
I love that.
You're always going to need it. If you look at that, you look at the shorish of the word. Actually, the shorish of the word mevater is the same as the shorish for the word extra. It's yoser, right? It's the same shorish. So you can be mevater on things that are honestly extra, things that are not honestly extra, things which are basic human needs like respect and companionship. You can't, and you're not going to, no matter how much you tell yourself that you're going to, it's not going to work. So the question is how to fix how to work on these things. So the best temperature taker for these kinds of things is, what is communication like for you? Can you talk about these things? Can you talk directly about these things? What would it be like to talk about these things with the other person? So coming back to what we said before about the dysfunctional challenges, the challenges that just don't allow a relationship to function. If you're afraid of communicating about these things and you find yourself tiptoeing around these issues which are bothering you because you feel like talking about them would make something far worse, then that is an indicator that you don't feel safe in the relationship. Whether it's a matter of consciously being abusive or a matter of just not being able to have a decent conversation.
Like if someone shuts you down when you try to have a good conversation.
Yeah, which in certain situations may be abusive in and of itself, depending on the details. But if you can't have that kind of a respectful conversation about difficult things, then that's problematic. You have to figure out exactly where you want to go with that. And as we said, consent and safety that comes from consent in all areas is a mainstay of a healthy relationship, and you can't have consent if there's no communication. It doesn't exist. So one thing that I think, and this is I think the last thing that we can take some questions and answers if we have time. the best way to navigate these kinds of things, and this is whether things are, whether you're in a good relationship, whether you're just starting out, whether you've been at it for a long time, is to have somebody to talk to, a third party who knows you well and who you trust implicitly. And when I say trust implicitly, I mean that this is not the kind of person who you feel who you feel is going to push you one way or the other, that they have their own agenda, but rather that they're going to have your best interest in mind, and you are the only person whose best interest he's going to have in mind, or she. It doesn't really matter who it is. It could be a teacher, could be a mentor, could be a close friend, could be parents, could be a therapist. Any number of people are capable of having these kinds of conversations and giving you that kind of support. The most important thing is, again, cycling back to safety, is that this is a person that you feel that they have your best interest in mind. You feel that kind of safety, and that you also feel safe sharing the entire story with them. The story I once heard, there's a girl in seminary who was speaking with one of her teachers about her dating life. And for some reason, things kept going off the rails, just kept going off the rails. And the teacher was trying to get involved, trying to give appropriate advice, but for some reason, it just wasn't working. After doing some prodding, it came out that this girl was only telling the teacher like 25% of the story. So on the one hand, she obviously didn't feel safe doing that, whatever the story was, whatever the details were. She obviously didn't feel safe sharing more than that. On the other hand, the teacher can only give advice based on what she hears. So if you're telling me 25% of the story, I'm giving you best case scenario, 25% of the advice. Worst case scenario, completely wrong advice, because I have no clue what's flying. So those are really the two major things for being able to have somebody, an effective mentor, I guess let's call it, is that it's somebody that you trust, and somebody that you trust enough to say things in their entirety, that you trust to give the full story, even again when it's uncomfortable. These are important situations. Very often they're important situations, and even though it may be uncomfortable to talk about these things, and especially with things like, when people are dating for the first time, and they might not be used to boy-girl relationships, they might not be used to the ins and outs of things and their own feelings regarding these things, which is very common in the frum world. It can be very difficult to share these things honestly, but it's important to be able to have that space to have those kinds of uncomfortable conversations.
So this is a great segue for me to give a little plug for myself, because as a dating coach, this is literally exactly what I do. People come to me when they're dating and they say, help, I'm so confused. And we really work to get clarity. So if you are listening to this and you need someone to talk to, feel free to reach out. Yeshaya also has a private practice. I don't know if you're only licensed in New York. In New York. Yeah. So if you're in his area, reach out to him. And I'm sure there's a bunch of other really wonderful resources and people to speak to out there.
I'm also going to put in the chat
yes.
the contact information for Shalom Task Force's hotline.
Okay.
We also have a chat line, which is the same number, but it's text and WhatsApp accessible, which it's interesting. But we've noticed that certain demographics tend to go more for the texting and WhatsApp, and it's a different kind of conversation very often than somebody who might call the hotline and speak with one of our operators there. But it's there. It's not a 24/7 service, but it's there most of the day. I think the chat, you can check on the online website for exact times. It's most of the day during the day. The hotline is also most of the day during the day. Very good people on the other end.
Okay, so we have a question coming in. If the guy you are dating acts 100% loyal, gives a huge tip to the waiter, talks nicely to people, respectful, doesn't have signs of anger, shows vulnerability, how suddenly did he flip 180 degrees after marriage to be the total opposite? My question is how to pick up on this when getting to know someone.
That's a tough question. Do you want to take this one? Or do you?
Well,
I think Sasha Gordon would like to answer this question live, so I'm not sure if that you want to take this one or if that's just something that the system does.
Sorry, say it again.
It says on the screen, I'm looking at the question answer box, it says that you would like to answer this question live. So I'm not sure if that means that you want to answer it or if you just want to answer it, or we should
Oh,
just.
I just clicked something.
Okay.
I clicked something that said I'm going to answer it live. We're going to answer it live. So
Okay.
I'm sorry. Go for it, please.
I think it's very hard to answer this kind of a question. My gut feeling is that there's always going to be something that's happening, whether you pick up on it or not, or whether you are picking up on it and just not allowing yourself to acknowledge that feeling, because there are other good things which you like. Going back to what we were talking about with attraction, there are many different kinds of attraction. Part of that might be, on some level, this is somebody that I could get together with and marry and have a family with, regardless of who the person is. So, and that's a very powerful feeling. It's a very powerful feeling of like, this is somebody that I could get together with and have a family. This could be the end of my dating career. This could be the beginning of a marriage, like all these different things that could come up that could help you to, or that could prompt you to not acknowledge a little niggling feeling at the bottom that something is not so great. My gut feeling is that when somebody makes such a total flip, there's always something to pick up on. And it really is a matter of really being in touch with your feelings and allowing yourself to have those feelings. I could be completely wrong on that, but that's my gut. Hey, you're on mute.
Oops. Okay. I also really believe in doing research because someone can present themselves a certain way, but people who know them for a long time know them in a different level. And asking the people on the reference list, let's say, who else can I speak to? Like with my husband now, I spoke to his therapist and we had some couples counseling sessions together and she really vouched for him. So do they have friends? Can you speak to their friends? Like if someone has no friends, that might be a red flag, right? So you want, I personally believe in doing research. I know.
Yes.
I don't know what you say about that.
I believe in doing research also. And I think another interesting point on that is that I kind of look at the dating process as an extension of the research process. Because like everything can look great on paper. And now you're actually doing research into what it's actually like to be around the other person. And at the same time, you are hopefully building a solid relationship. But looking at things as part of the research process can help you to kind of acknowledge the feelings that come up for you while you're going through that.
Okay, so I have another question coming in. I have had a previous relationship with a narcissist and learned that statistically it is likely that people will fall for an NPD, narcissistic person. I'm going to botch that up.
That kind of person, yeah.
Narcissistic personality disorder twice. So statistically, they'll fall for that type of person twice. What are some practical things I could do to improve my chances of that not happening again? I already have a therapist and dating coach. Or things I can look out for in a relationship specifically for NPD. And how do I get over the fear of entering another relationship and having it happen again?
So that's a great question. So I have seen that statistic before. I haven't looked deeply into the research, so I can't say like exactly what the details of why that's true might be. On a practical level, if you have a therapist that you're working with and that you feel comfortable with and that you are confident in being able to support you properly, I think you're in a good place. And again, as we said about the trusting your gut and having a mentor, is feeling confident that you can actually share 100% of what's actually going on in the relationship as it happens, as it unfolds. And the fear of getting into another relationship, it's a very valid fear. It's a very scary thing. I mean, narcissists can be really scary people to be around, and certainly to have close relationships with. And the fear of that happening, like there are a couple of ideas that you can maybe think about. Is learning to trust yourself, which is something you can talk about with your therapist. Learning to trust what you're seeing, learning to as we said, to talk honestly about what's really going on and how you're actually feeling. And throughout the process, being able to trust yourself step by step. I find that this is not specifically with relationship anxiety, but I think with fears of this nature in general, a lot of times what the thing that holds us back is that we look at the end result and we're scared of the end result. The reason that we're scared of the end result is because we haven't, as of right now, where I'm sitting right now, I haven't gone through those steps to get to that end result. So like the analogy I would use, if you give a first grader a math book on quantum mechanics, what are they going to do with that? They're going to open it up and they're going to see like all sorts of weird Greek letters and stuff. And I've never learned quantum mechanics, so I don't know even what you would see. But the idea is that it's just overwhelming to think about dealing with that end result because I haven't done the steps that I need to do in order to get there. Whereas if you're able to trust yourself just to take the next step, just to move one step at a time to go forward and test the waters slowly, then by the time you get to that end result, you may be fine. You may trust yourself much more than looking forward for it right now.
Nice. Okay. Another question. You said that being Mavatar is only on things you don't need, things you can live without. So how do you balance that with compromise? Maybe we should start this with like a little bit of a definition of Mavatar. I know you kind of mentioned it before, but not all of our listeners are probably familiar.
Okay. So the concept of Mavatar, the idea of being Mavatar is that, see if I can think of a good idea for a good example for this. It's basically giving up on something in favor of letting someone else have what they want. So a classic example is, let's say you have two kids who are fighting over a cookie, and one decides to let the other one have it. That's being Mavatar, or officially that's being Mavatar. It's like, oh, great, you're a Mavatar boy, you're a Mavatar girl, whoopie-doo, yeah, applause. And it's great, it is, because, that kind of thing can help people learn to live without things that they're very into having. So compromise is not necessarily Mavatar. It's coming to an agreement that you're happy with, that you're okay with.
Mm.
So you want A, I want B, let's come to some kind of an agreement in the middle that where we're both comfortable enough getting a bit of what we have. I like Chinese, you like pizza. So I would like to go to Chinese and I don't want to go to pizza. You would like to go to pizza, you don't want to go to Chinese. So we'll split it. One time we'll go there, one time we'll go there. It's not being Mavatar because I'm not saying, let's go to pizza all the time. That would be being Mavatar. So now that's maybe a very mundane example, but like, let's say something that, something in a marriage where, you can imagine that things that happen in a relationship that are maybe a little bit more important than whether we eat pizza or Chinese or whether I have the cookie or not. Giving up on those things, like giving up on a basic on a foundation of respect. I don't need being Mavatar like that, saying that I don't need respect because it's for whatever reason that you're able to rationalize that.
Mm.
That's technically, you could say that I'm trying to be Mavatar, but you're not really being Mavatar because you're not really giving it up because it's always going to bother you. The feelings of resentment, the feelings of pain are always going to be there. So you're not really giving it up. Being Mavatar in its truest form can only happen if it's something that I'm giving up and I'm totally okay with giving it up.
So the person who asked about compromise versus Mavatar, she just clarified that she didn't have any positive models for compromise. So I guess, I don't know, would you want to address that?
So I think that's a hard thing that's a hard situation to be in. It really is. I would say that if a person doesn't have positive models for compromise, then that just makes the idea of having a mentor even more important. Because even if a person doesn't know how, practically doesn't know how to compromise, people don't need to learn how to feel resentment, and they don't need to learn how to feel pain in their relationships. That's something that just happens naturally. So let's say I say, okay, fine, I don't need to have any of these things. they're still going to feel upset because they don't have the things that they need.
Mm.
So this is situations like this is where having somebody to speak to is super important.
All right, so another question. How do you know if someone crossing your boundaries is because you aren't communicating clearly or maybe an accident?
What was that? One more time.
How do you know if someone crossing your boundaries is because you aren't communicating clearly or maybe an accident?
How do you know if it's a lack of communication? So what happens when you bring it up? That's the question I would ask there. If you find that the person is, and it could happen, you know, people are, we're all human, presumably, and we make mistakes and we do things that other people don't like. It's just the way we work, kind of. The question is what happens if you bring it up. The question is what happens when you're trying to assert that boundary. You know, I'll tell you, there's a story that I heard once. There's a woman, a couple is married for like 27, 20, 28 years, whatever, a long time. And somehow the woman, after that amount of time, got up the guts to tell her husband, I don't like how you treat me. I never have. I felt abused, controlled, and terrible. And it has to end. And he looks at her and he says, I had absolutely no idea you felt like that. Let's make a change. They went for therapy and now they're in a great place. But it's like, if she hadn't said something, he could have gone on for another 28 years, you know?
Wow.
So it's a very powerful story. Like a lot of times when we hear stories like that, we think like, okay, and it's straight down the drain. But like they were able to do the work that was necessary in order to correct whatever was going on. So sometimes that'll work out, that the person crosses the boundary, even continually, and you say something and they make a change. And sometimes you'll say, okay, this is my boundary. I don't want you crossing this boundary, and they'll continue to cross that boundary. That suggests that there's something else going on there. Whether it's an intentionality or a lack of unwillingness to make it important enough to remember, that's a different story that we would have to speak to the person involved. But that would be a problem.
Okay, so another question. How do you detect the guy love bombing the woman in a very smart, subtle way? And to know that it's just his best behavior to get you or have you. It's not really who he is. And he is mavater, totally to the relationship and wants to please constantly, but really after the marriage, he's an animal.
That's a tough one. I would say that, again, that comes back to what we were talking about both research and doing smart research and being super aware of what you're actually feeling in the moment. Yeah, maybe I'm reading too much into the words, but somebody who's mevater totally to the relationship, that's not really so healthy either. You know, it suggests that the person doesn't have a sense of individuality that he's trying to support. And if you're getting the feeling that the person's like all out into the relationship in a way which doesn't seem normal, it may be fun to an extent, but it's also a little bit of a red flag. And it'll also come across just practically as whether it's irritating or annoying or too much, it'll come across in some way. So I think a combination of research and really being in touch with your own feelings about it is where to go with that.
Just a little feedback for you. People are saying, excellent presentation. What's Shaya Krause's contact info? This is incredible.
Oh, thank you.
People want to get the PDF that you mentioned about dating.
Yeah. So if you want, I think the easiest way to do it probably is to just email it to you. You can send it out to whoever registered. Sure. So we can do that.
And they will be sending out a recording of this after. So some people are asking if they can get the recording. Let's see, another question. Regarding dishonesty, when dating within an Orthodox community, people rely heavily on trust and sometimes appearances. It is so easy to get away with funny business or illegal activity and have no one in the community, including the person's references and close friends, know about it. As in the case of my ex, how do you find out what is really going on without asking for legal docs, tax statements, etc.? Wow.
So I think so. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not, so I can't talk to like how that would look. But I think one theme that we're seeing, whether it's with this question, the one about the love bombing, the one about the NPD, what it really boils down to is being able to trust yourself. Like there's no way to tell. There isn't. There really is no way to tell for sure that the person that you're dating, the person that you're married to, is a good, upstanding member of society who is a nice person. I mean, like it's sad and it's very scary. There are horror stories. There are many stories which are terrible to hear, even without details. It's terrible. At the same time, we have to be able to trust our own impressions. If you've done your due diligence, if you've done your research and you've spoken with yourself and you're honestly comfortable enough with what you're seeing, you have no reason to doubt that what you're seeing is true after having gone through everything, or speaking with a mentor, whether it's a Rav or a therapist or a friend or the shadchan or whoever it is, having done your due diligence, there comes a point where you kind of just have to trust yourself.
Mm.
And which is not easy. It is totally not easy. I mean, you have like marriage, it's a big decision. It is,
Mhm.
and like God willing, everybody should have great, happy marriages and which are fulfilling and wonderful. At the end of the day, we can only get to that if we're willing to take a leap of faith. How big that leap of faith is depends. Some people are more comfortable with leaping than others. And you want to go back to that guy who's skydiving. That really was a leap of faith.
Literally.
Yeah.
All right. So here we go. We have another question. Okay, first the comment. This has been so illuminating and validating to me that my marriage was abusive. Yeah, you know what? I feel actually similar. There's certain, I love that chart you did with the healthy, unhealthy, and abusive breakdown, because like sometimes we tolerate things and we don't realize how unhealthy they are and how really it's bordering into abusive, it's that like, make it work, shalom bias that we're kind of taught so much. Okay. So here someone asks, what are red flags of addiction like marijuana, sex, porn?
So that's an interesting question. And this is like half joking, but not really. With marijuana, I think the first red flag is the smell. And seriously, if somebody is very into marijuana and it's using it in a way that's really, really making them not functional, it's going to show. It's just going to show. I think a lot of the red flags that you can notice are in how you're interacting with the other person, and this is true regardless of what the addiction is. Do you feel you're covering for them? Do you feel like you're making excuses for them? Do you feel like you have to hide certain things about the relationship? And even if you don't know, like, okay, he's doing this, he's doing that, I don't know that the person is, going off high someplace, or I don't know if the person's, in the basement doing whatever. I know that I have to cover for the person not being able to be on time, not respecting my time, not respecting me as a person, saying things that make me uncomfortable. It's all essentially the same red flags that we mentioned before. And that's really what it boils down to. I mean, the whole concept of addiction and how that plays out in a marriage, that's really a presentation in and of itself, to discuss how that plays out if you want, actually. So there was somebody actually just recently she's actually in the middle of doing a series. It's a woman in Crown Heights. She's doing a series on getting ready for marriage. And I believe one of the presentations addresses some stuff like that. I can send you a link. You can send it out if you want.
Great.
But yeah, it's a tough one. And again, it's the same theme of like really being able to trust yourself with what you're seeing, whether it's something that makes you uncomfortable, and trusting yourself that you're uncomfortable and there's a reason for it, or trusting yourself that I don't see anything that makes me uncomfortable, and being okay with that realization. That's really what it boils down to.
Okay, so here's another comment and question. It's challenging because I live out of town. Should the guy come to me or should I be traveling to them? Even in cases where we are only an hour away, they want me to come to them. That seems like a red flag. Maybe they don't really want to date for marriage, even though they say they want to.
So the whole out of town thing, that's a tough one. Um, I don't know what the standard practice is, if there is a standard practice. I think that overall it's something that has to be done with respect and ideally should be done on a case-by-case basis. Honestly, it's like if you have one person whose schedule is more flexible, maybe that person should go out there or maybe switch off or whatever it is. I think there's no, I don't think that there's any real answer. And I think that the important thing is to just be a mensch about it, be menschlich, and work with each other. Like, if one thing I will say is that if somebody can't work out traveling for a date, then what are they going to be like when it comes to conflict in a marriage? So that's like just food for thought.
I also, like, as a dating coach, I feel like don't make it too easy on the guys right away. I mean, I've done it. Like, I've traveled internationally for a guy, but like usually I'm asking them to pay for my ticket if I'm coming to them first,
Yeah.
or make some effort on my behalf. Like, you don't want to like be doing all the effort on your part initially. Like, there is something to be said for the guy pursuing.
Yeah. I think that's the. I know when I was dating, I also did some traveling. Like, I'm in New York. There were people who lived not in New York, so I went there. It happens. It was actually kind of fun. But I think that there is definitely what to be said about that. I think just overall, like, just keeping in mind the idea of, this is an example of, to an extent, it depends really who's the one who's actually in charge of making these kinds of decisions. But to an extent, this is an example of conflict resolution and might give you some idea of how that's going to work going forward.
So I just want to make sure that we addressed all the questions that came in advance.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about recognizing narcissists. I think the bottom line was you do the best you can, you do your research, you are discerning as possible, and then try to have that self-trust. And there's only as much as you can do.
Yeah.
The next question was, what are pink flags, things that you can work on?
So I mean, that's really the same thing. It's like, is this something that I can honestly live with as it is? Am I thrilled with it? No, but honestly, I'm okay with it. It's like, you can, like, if somebody who I don't know has a habit of scratching their nose when they're talking. Like, some people might be like, okay, that's totally not a non-issue. I didn't even notice he's doing that. Some people might say like, oh my gosh, that's so weird. I can't take that. And some people are like, okay, it's weird, but like, everything else is fine. So like, pink flags are the kinds of things, and I obviously if we're calling them flags, we're talking about things that are a little bit more intense than nose scratching. But the idea of a pink flag is something that, like, it bothers you, but you honestly feel, and honestly being the key word, that it's okay. So that would be a pink flag.
Okay, so then the next one. So this talked about, like, what do you do if you're shomer negia and you're not living together while you're dating? How are you able to, like, really check out, all these red flags for NPD, BPD, etc.?
So I'm not sure. Just to make sure I understand the questions. If you're not shomer negia, you're not living. If you are shomer negia and you're not living together.
Oh, yes, sorry.
How do you check these things out?
Yeah, like, can you really get a good picture of somebody?
To an extent you can. And again, it's paying attention not to just how they treat you, but how they treat others who are around you, how they treat their family, and over the development of the relationship, you will end up seeing them around their family. How does the family relate to each other? How do they relate to the person you're going out with? These are all ways to kind of pick things out, and they're all going to end up being flags of one color or another that you're going to notice and that you're going to have a reaction to.
I mean, something like sexual abuse, that you wouldn't necessarily know? I mean, are there any markers to that when you're before you're sexual?
Um, I think that there's some general markers towards abuse. I don't have like clear information on exactly how to tell sexual abuse beforehand. But I think that there are some general markers of abuse to be aware of. And then sometimes, and then some, there are stories that I've heard that, there were no markers, and then engaging in a sexual relationship when you started out, when they first got married, a lot of stuff came up because that triggered something that had not been triggered before. So there is definitely the possibility that you won't know. But again, it's a matter of trusting yourself and trusting what you're seeing in the other person. And knowing also that, this, God forbid that happens, and, unfortunately it does happen, but there's a way through it. Knowing also that there is a way through it, and that there are ways to grow and to have that kind of close relationship, even if God forbid something like that does happen.
How can we recognize a sex addict? Did we cover that?
Yeah, we spoke about that.
Sorry, I'm like looking at different
Yeah, no
chats
problem.
in different places at once. So like, okay. All right, this is, again, is a question that I think we kind of covered. When reputable community members who seem so nice, yet the wife experiences abuse at home, how can we know that in advance?
Same answer.
Right.
There is no way to know in advance, for sure. But again, most of the times when these things happen, many people who go through these situations will be able to pick out certain red flags that they saw when they were dating. So being honest with yourself, being honest with your mentor, and trusting yourself with the information that you're honestly picking up.
Okay, so here's a question. I went out with a narcissistic person 7 years ago, very toxic relationship. Now he is showing he has changed. Is it okay to revisit?
That's a tough call. I don't want to say yes or no, just because I don't know either of the people involved. I would ask you what your gut is telling you, and trust that.
Yeah. How can you tell what's a difference of opinion and what will inevitably be a barrier in a relationship?
I think you can tell what's going to actually be a barrier in a relationship by how the difference is discussed. Like, again, as we said before, between 65 and 70% of differences is never going to be resolved. It's all in how you navigate. So I'd say, what's the experience like of navigating that kind of relationship? How does it go? And by looking at that, like, do you feel respected? Do you feel that even though the person has an opinion or a stance which is diametrically opposed to your own, that they still respect your right to have that kind of opinion? And that's really what you're looking for, I think, when you're looking at disagreements.
Great answer.
Thank you.
All right. Not sure if this is a red flags question or a hashkafa question, but can a religious couple be intimate while dating and still have a serious relationship?
I would wonder how you define serious relationship. Definitely a possibility, like from a clinical perspective, sure. From a hashkafic perspective, it's also possible. I mean, I just came up with this term earlier today for something completely different, but there's some term of frum functioning, which is basically like people who they'll live the lifestyle because there are benefits to it, but it doesn't necessarily resonate with them on a personal level. And I think that you can also say that with certain parts of frum life, and whether it's
orthoprax, like
okay,
like practicing orthodoxy, but not necessarily like buying it.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that somebody that a couple that has an intimate relationship that's sexual with each other before marriage is necessarily that,
right.
But like, it's just to look at that as something that, for whatever reason, within that moment, that relationship is not, that part of orthodoxy is not working for them in and of that moment. Could be something that they regret later on, could be something they're totally okay with later on and just aren't talking about outside of just them. But from a clinical perspective, yes, it is possible for a couple that decides that they're going to be intimate before marriage to have a perfectly fine, healthy relationship from an emotional standpoint.
I just want to add to that. I do feel that rushing too quickly into physical relationship can cloud your judgment. That, you know, if you feel like you do want to get intimate, just to hold off a little bit and make sure you like the person for who they are. Because as soon as you have all the hormones coming in and you have the oxytocin and the dopamine rushes and everything that's happening, you're just not thinking as clearly. So I would just say hold off a little bit and just make sure that you really like the person, they really like you and respect you, in order for it to develop into a serious relationship. I mean, I'm sure there are also relationships that start out with more casual relationships and develop into something more serious later. But if you're trying to start, you know, dating consciously, I would start, you know, with a clear head.
Yeah. I would also add to that, I think it's a great point. And I would also add to that to consider how it started off. Right? Was there pressure? Is this a mutual agreement? Was there full consent given on both sides? How did that start off? Because like if it's a frum couple, which at least on paper has the value of abstinence until marriage, how did that value get to be something that was overlooked? Was it a mutual agreement? Was it excitement? Was it an experimentation? Which, like, all of these different things could be, at least from a relationship perspective, totally fine. But if it's something that there was any hint of coercion from one end or the other, then that's something to be aware of, and that's something to really give some thought to.
Yeah. Okay. Is it a red flag if the guy has a critical personality?
Depends how it's used. And again, I think to think about how you honestly feel about it. Some people, I imagine there might be some people who appreciate that kind of a thing, like a critical personality, like really being aware of details, attention to detail, and noticing when things are not in place. Theoretically, I guess there could be somebody who's okay with that. But it's really all about your own reactions in the moment and what they honestly are.
I know we're like at like the hour and a half mark. There's a couple more comments. I don't know how long. I want to be respectful of your time.
So let's do it. Let's do a couple more, and then I guess we'll call it a day. I'm happy to come back a different time for more Q&A. I happen to enjoy Q&A stuff more than I like just talking about stuff. Yeah, it's more fun. It's more interesting.
Yeah. No, this is great, and I wanted to thank everyone who's joined and who's still on. I know a couple of people had to drop off. I know, you'll be able to listen to the replay after. Okay, so one question is, can you provide a few questions we can ask on the first call to rule out red flags?
Specific questions. So I would say specific questions are a tough one, because obviously everybody's different. What I would suggest strongly is phrasing your questions with an open end. So, like, for example, you can ask somebody like, okay, does this person ever get angry? No, end of story. Okay, great call. We've done our research. We're good to go. On the other hand, you can also ask a question, what's it like when this person doesn't get what he wants? What's it like when this person is disappointed? Or how do they act when there's a disagreement? Giving the person more of a chance to have to tell their own story and actually think through the details. You can also pay attention to not just the words they're saying, but how they're saying it. Is this something that the person sounds like they're really invested in? Is this person saying like, yeah, he's okay, or like somewhere in between? You'll catch intonation, you'll catch like the idea behind what they're saying, if they honestly believe it, or if they're saying it because this is a person who's a friend of mine and I feel a responsibility to take care of him and do the right thing and get him married off. There's a whole spectrum of ways to answer questions and ways to ask. And if you pick up on the details, you can start to put together a picture of what you're comfortable with and what you're not.
one question my father used to ask guys that he would, or references, he would say, if you had a sister or a daughter, would you marry this guy off to them? You know, and if they like they just like hesitated and they're like, yeah, like, I was like,
That's a great question. That's a great question. I think you have to be careful who you ask that to, because there are some people who maybe like, let's say a guy gives his friend as a reference and the friend's not married and has no kids. It could like take him a second to put himself into that frame of mind, like, I have a daughter, would I let him marry this person? Like it takes a second. You know?
Right. That's true. That's true. I mean, there's more to it than that, but yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't base everything off that. So I wonder if that question was not meant for references, but for actually the guy that you're dating. Can you provide a few questions we can ask on a first call to rule out red flags?
See, that's a hard one, because I think that if you're saying, like, if you have a checklist of questions that you're going to go through the first time you speak with a person, that kind of sets the tone for a relationship as one of suspicion, one of fear. And I think that better than asking specific questions about red flags, like, you know, it's like, on the one hand, you can kind of look at dating as like as research, and you can look at it as an interview for the position of spouse, if you want to call it that.
Right.
On the other hand, like it's one thing if you're going in for a job interview and they're like, okay, can you use Excel? And yes. Like, do you get angry? You know, it's a very, it sets the tone in a way which is not necessarily so great. So, but like allowing the interactions to develop organically and seeing what you see within those interactions is, I think, a better way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I remember with my first husband, I asked him on one of our dates, I said, how do you react when you get angry? And he says, I never get angry. I said, wow, that's great. You know, he says he never gets angry. It must mean it's true. Meanwhile, I don't know, maybe it was our dynamic, but it wasn't exactly the case. Okay. Right. Okay, a couple more comments. Sasha and Yeshaya, thank you. The information shared in this webinar and the time you invested is such a blessing. Thank you, Panina. Rachel says signs of annoyance or dishonesty. I'm not sure if that's a question or a comment. Someone said if someone has NPD, they don't change. If they have very narcissistic traits, changes.
I think they may change.
They may change.
Okay, and that could be true. You know, but again, it all really boils down to the signals you're picking up, like what their diagnosis is. You know, quite honestly, if we would go through every single person that we know, we would probably be able to diagnose them with at least one or two different mental health disorders. It's just the way the DSM is written, the way that it's the DSM is for those who don't know, is the big book of mental health diagnosis. It's like 3 inches thick, it's like 1,000 pages. And if you're trying to diagnose somebody, you can get anybody. You really could. The useful thing is what you're picking up. It's really what you're picking up and how you feel about it and how safe you feel about that.
All right, so a couple more comments. This webinar was amazing, super insightful. Thank you so much for coordinating it.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Yeshaya, for doing this for free for us. We really appreciate that. Okay, so another question. Sorry, I didn't understand, what is PD? How is that connected to Shomer Negia? I think because we mentioned BPD and NPD, so bipolar disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. I think it was somehow connected in the same question about if you're Shomer Negia, what if you don't recognize that? I don't.
Yeah, it not necessarily connected.
Not necessarily connected. Okay. Someone comments, over the course of a few dates, getting the feel for how he and his mother gets along yields a great deal of information.
Yes, very true. Very, very true.
Okay, well, those are all the comments and questions that came in, unless anyone has anything else to add. All right. Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining. This was quite an investment of time, so thank you so much for your time. Yeshaya, this has been really wonderful. It's thanks to Shalom Task Force. I think they sponsored this.
Yes, yes, they did.
So I really appreciate that they did this for us, for this community. I will be sending out the replay and ways to get in touch with both me and Yeshaya and Shalom Task Force. be in touch.
Yes, let's be in touch. Thank you
Thank
very
you
much,
so
everyone,
much.
for coming. It's been a pleasure, and all the best.
All right. Bye.
Take care.